Welcome to Creator Toolbox. I was just dancing to the music in the background, but I don't know what it is about that song. It gets me going in the morning. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are and whenever you are. Creator Toolbox is the webinar that lets you learn how to put tools in your toolbox. We're going to show you a feature or a particular capability of the ServiceNow platform. And with that, let's get on with our introductions. My name is Chuck Tomasi, Senior Developer Advocate at ServiceNow. Been here since 2010, customer for a couple of years before that, and a long, wide, varied history of software development going back into the punch card days of the early dinosaurs. So with that, let's hear from Earl next.
Hi, everyone. I am Earl Duque. I am with ServiceNow for 2 months now. Before that, I was with a bunch of customers, mostly in higher ed. I'm going to be the eyes and ears that are brand new to the features that are being shown today, in case I can be the blind eye to and have some questions to ask today.
And our guest of honor, the man who's bringing you all the great content today, Sascha. Give yourself a quick intro.
Yeah, hi, my name is Sascha Wildgrube. I joined ServiceNow in 2020. That's also pretty much the beginning of my journey with ServiceNow. I'm very enthusiastic. I'm a senior technical consultant in EMEA, so I'm helping clients to get their head around their own app development. And over the time, I grew so enthusiastic and happy with the automated testing framework and the mechanisms and the methods that we can spin around it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to show you some tricks and treats around the ATF today.
You said you were in EMEA, and I almost heard India, but that is not an India accent.
No, EMEA.
Right. And
I'm in Germany.
Just a quick reminder that we've moved Creator Toolbox from Tuesdays to every other Friday. So we've got live coding happy hour, and then every other week we're going to do Creator Toolbox. So you'll always have something. This is a Creator Toolbox week. We will be back in 2 weeks at the same time with another episode. And this way we can reach out to our EMEA people instead on Fridays. It works a lot better for this team and for the consumption. So just remember, Friday is your new content day from our developer advocate team. And this is a Creator Toolbox. Oh, hey, Earl is all over the social media stuff. Look at this. We've got YouTube comments flying in. If you've got some questions, ask them live. We'll put them on there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Sascha. You are the man of the hour. What have you got for test-driven development?
Oh, yeah. I'm so in love with test-driven development. But first, let's get a definition of what do we really mean by that. With test-driven development, I mean, you can if you search the internet, you probably get 1,000 different definitions of it. For me, it means that creating tests is an integral part of your development work. So in an ideal world, you even start creating your test even before you create the code, probably even to help you define the interface that you're going to implement. Sometimes it's a process that runs in parallel. And the interesting question is now, how can we apply that into ServiceNow, and especially around when we try to implement things that might have some relationship in the GUI, or are embedded in some forms where you would not usually create a lot of code on the one hand, and in codes and low-level functions on the other side. So I really have the strong belief that investing that initial additional time in writing tests saves you so much time going forward. Whatever you build, at some point, it will reach a complexity where it is simply impossible to make changes somewhere without the danger of breaking something at the other end. So having tests in place in the first place is always a good decision. All right. Now let's get started with that. Now, first of all, we need a good example. And I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible in the first place. I don't want to bore you with a Hello World application, but this is probably what it's going to end up with. Now, let's say we are working on incidents. And working on incidents, we all know that this is sometimes tedious and not very cheerful work. So it might be a good idea to have a function that cheers us up a little bit. Wouldn't that be nice? A cheer us up function? Okay.
Yes. Now I could use one of those all the time.
Yeah. You see, I'm a little bit constructing a use case here. Let me just do that for the sake of the example. So I'm creating a new UI action. I want a button that cheers me up. Does that sound okay to you guys?
I'm going to put that on the global table. Just have it everywhere.
Oops. Yeah, a global table. Well, we can try that in a moment.
You put it where you want. Most of the time, yeah, I would think an incident would be a good place for that.
Yeah, well, at least a point to start from. All right. Now, what do we want to do? Again, let's start a simple thing. Let's just add a message that cheers us up a bit. Say cheers. Right? No. That's the message.
Good catch.
Is anyone watching? Hello.
I was doing technical stuff on my end.
All right, let's see if that works. Oops.
That would have been a live coding happy hour moment.
A bit, yeah. Okay.
There it is.
Yeah, here it is. I think the button is not yet cheerful enough. Want it to be a primary
Green?
button.
There you go. Brighten it up.
We want to brag about what we're doing here, aren't we? So here we go. Cheers. Let's do something with it. Okay, it says cheers. Okay, wonderful. But I think, to be honest, it doesn't really help me here. I mean, I was just here in the context of that incident, and I jumped out of it. That was not my intention. So we need to add a small little trick here.
You need to set redirect URL. Oh, you're doing something different. Where are you trying to redirect us?
Well, to the same record.
Okay. So that if in the UI action, you can say action.setRedirectURL current. That's all you need to do. You don't need to construct the whole URL yourself.
We can do what?
Change line 2 to say action.setRedirectURL, and then in the parentheses you just put current. It'll take a glide record or a URL. I will admit the action object is not documented all that well.
Where do you get access to it? In here?
Yes, action.setRedirectURL as camel case. URL is going to be all uppercase, and then in parentheses you just all caps. There you go. And then in parentheses you just put current.
With quotes or without?
Those two are roughly equivalent.
Without quotes.
Without quotes. You're passing it an object, a glide record object.
Okay. Doesn't seem to see this.
Pay no attention to that syntax checker. I use this all the time, and this is probably where it's going to make a fool of me.
Cheer.
There you are.
All right. Okay, that's nice. That's nice. I suppose this is an undocumented feature.
It didn't even have IntelliSense.
I've pulled that out of some of the earliest UI actions I ever recall seeing back in 2008.
That is neat. That is neat. All right. Now this paid off for me already. Thank you. Thank you very much for that.
When I do things like that, it's like, well, I've learned something today. I'm out of here. I'm done.
Well,
I
then
learn something new every day. My mission is accomplished.
Okay, obviously my solution didn't work.
Oh dear.
What's wrong? Did I do anything? Ah. This is it.
You need a plus in there?
I did. The equal sign was not there. Probably I don't have to reload the page, but just to be sure. No. Okay, let's take your solution. Not that I didn't try this before, but that's how it is.
That's all right. We're all learning.
Okay, it said cheers, and we're still on the same record. So hopefully whoever is working on that particular incident can use this button to cheer himself up a little bit. Now, I think that this message here is, it's not very personal. So I want to have it, a little bit more sophisticated. And I would like to display the name of the user. Cheers. User. The name, for example, like this. And do it again. Okay, now this seems to work fine. So far, so good.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, we're getting there. Now, of course, obviously, there's no complex code in here, and you could argue, well, do we really need an automated test for that? Probably not yet. But I'm a big fan of separating concerns and assembling the message that I want to use to cheer my users up are probably a different concern, and I might want to reuse it somewhere. I want to make sure that this functionality really works.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm making a decision here right now. I want to put this whole logic into a function that will implement in the script include. So
I like it.
that function doesn't exist yet. Some syntax is not right. Closing bracket. Okay, that won't work, of course, because the function cheers does not exist.
Right.
Let's create a new script include with that function. Something like this. All right.
This is just a great general practice. Even if you're only using this function in one UI action in one place, a script include still makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You can get down to that unit testing and say, I am 100% certain that this function is accepting the inputs and sending the outputs that it should. It's doing the error checking it needs to. So just from a unit testing standpoint, this is the way to go.
Absolutely.
Of course, you may have made a flow designer action, which is kind of where I'm migrating a lot of my script includes these days.
And even there, I would argue that if you want to use, let's say, more complex logic in a flow designer step or a subflow or whatever action, even in that case, I would argue that using script includes that are then used within the flow designer actions is probably also a convenient way to do it.
It's also an easy way to bridge. If you've already got a lot of code that's in a script include, and you say, well, I'd like to use this in a flow, you can have your actions call that script include. So that's an easy way to bridge over to that.
So now what I said earlier, I said, well, in an ideal test-driven development work, that would be the latest point in time when we start creating our test, right? And that's going to be what we're doing next. But before that, I'm also a big fan of surfacing our automated tests. I want to make them visible. I really want to see the action going on. So in order to do that, I will create a test suite first. Create a new one in my Cheer application. I call it Cheer. The test suite just is named according to the application that it is sitting in. And what I do now is I will create an application menu for my Cheer application. And I create a module that gives me direct access to the test suite. So it's not a list of records. I want to have a single record.
This is interesting. I hadn't thought about building a module in the application to do the testing.
You don't have to, of course.
No, but that's a great idea. It's as smart as putting a properties page in your application to get to your properties.
Yeah.
The only concern I would have is you'd want to ensure that that you have a role on that or some sort of filter so everybody doesn't see the test when it gets into production. They're not just smacking that test suite button, but they have a test role or an admin role so they see that module.
Absolutely. I mean, we could go to the length of creating another role.
Right.
The Cheers admin, right? Would be an interesting role. Yeah, probably not the worst job in an organization, being the Cheer admin.
Chief levity officer.
No, come on, that sounds fun. Let's create a role for that. That's really nice. Let's create the Cheer admin.
You just can't resist.
I can't. I just call it admin because due to the application prefix here, it already says Cheer admin.
Right.
Nice.
I know we're a little off your script, but I love it.
Yeah, kind of. But it doesn't matter. And we'll assign that role directly to the menu because for the time being, the Cheer application doesn't do anything else but cheering. No, why doesn't it show me the roles? I need to reload it. There it is.
Very nice.
Here we go. All right, now we protected the visibility of the test suites from these prying eyes.
Okay, back to building a test suite to test our Cheer.
Yeah, but first of all, I would like to see the menu in the menu, right?
Oh, right. Okay.
And this is something where I'm always asking myself. At some point, I will create a plugin, feature, app, or whatever that automatically reloads the menu pane when changes take place.
If you do that through UI 16, it will automatically refresh. If you do it through Studio, it does not. There's a system event that gets triggered.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I want to have the changes that I do in Studio directly reflected in the menu. Now here it is, test suite. Does it work? Yeah, we're ending up directly in our test suite. Okay. Now what we actually wanted to do is creating a test, wasn't it?
Right.
Let's do that. Create a test. And I call the test Cheer. What did I call the function? The function it called Cheers. No, the intention was
Ooh. That never happens.
It's always, if you do typos, you better detect them early in the process, because the later you do, the more pain it is to correct it, isn't it?
We're developers. We understand pain.
Yeah, there's a certain point in my application development where I'll write the function first and then determine where I'm going to call it, because I could never remember what I called it, especially if you get some of the longer ones. Was it insert document into record, or was it insert doc into rec? What did I call that? I can't remember. So I write the function that I just copy and paste.
Yeah, that's a good strategy. And it's also nice. I mean, if you have a number of functions in a single application, you can see whether you changed the way of your naming conventions over time. Is it record update or update record?
Yes. Oh, I am so inconsistent on that stuff. In the same application, I'll have a script include that says, add element, and then I'll have another one that says insert element. I'm no help to myself.
And you might always argue, well, there's no right way to do it as long as it is consistent, right?
I'm not even consistent most of the time.
Yeah.
But if I'm the only developer, I can only get mad at myself.
Indeed, indeed. So I created a test that is called cheer. Okay, cheer for the application, cheer for the function. Not meant to confuse anyone. And I created a server-side test script. Save this test. All right. Okay. Server-side test script. And you might have seen that a server-side test script comes with some boilerplate code with some hints on how to use just mean. To be honest with you, I'm not the biggest fan of just mean. So I'll just don't use it.
It's helpful to understand what the parameters are and what you can do with them. If you wanted to get into, like you said, you've got those input arguments, output, step result, assert equal. Like if you didn't have those comments, you'd be running to the docs all the time.
So how does it work? I think we can do something like this. Let's see what it does. It's a fail. What's happening? All right, syntax error. Cheers is not defined. Okay, now we just stepped in my I just stepped in my own trap, right? I just renamed the function. Okay. Still, it doesn't like it. What's wrong? Still, cheers is not defined. I didn't save it. Always save the script before you run it again.
How did you miss that?
Okay, now it passed. And if you use the normal logging function within a server-side scripting, a server-side test step, it has some HTML slack around it. But anyway, it provides some output, but not yet what I expected, actually. The cheer function should just produce an empty string, isn't it? So let's add something so that we understand what the actual output is. Output cheer outputs whatever the function outputs. Okay. Now, this looks better, doesn't it? Okay, so it says, okay, the application scope, and this is the log output that I generated as part of the test. Now, obviously, no matter what that function would output, it would always say that the test is successful because I'm not checking against any expected values.
Right.
And to be honest with you, it might be a little bit time consuming to write all the necessary boilerplate code by myself each time. So guess what? I created a macro for that.
Oh, better add that to the library, Earl.
Right away.
Get your Hacktoberfest participation in.
Plugging our other show.
So I'm going to run this first, just to make sure that it's not, I don't know, full moon or something like that. No, okay, that works. All right. Now, boilerplate code obviously doesn't do anything. Let me quickly lead you through it, what I'm doing here. Obviously, there's a log function that adds strings to a string called log. All right. And I'm using that string as the input parameter for set output message. The idea in a server-side script step is that you produce the log output that is supposed to appear in the step output when you execute the test as one single string. So you can't do something like, okay, add this string to the output message, but you have to provide the output message in one go. So that's why I'm collecting individual calls to my log function in that string in order to populate the output message in one go. The second thing that you need to know is that you're supposed to return a Boolean value, true or false, to indicate whether your test is successful or not. So if you return false, the test will fail. Let's try this. Result equals false. The test will fail. At least should. Run test. Okay, here we go. So far, so good. Now, what does that have to do with our cheers function? Let's remove this first. Okay, now, what else is in the boilerplate code? In the boilerplate code, there's a function that I call test case underscore function xxx. And as you can see, this function xxx is being called. The result is compared to an expected value. And depending on whether this comparison is successful, I set this variable to false, and I create a log output that says test case failed. Now, obviously, the function that we want to test is not function xxx, it is cheer. And of course, I want to call that function. And as you can see, the example that we're going through here has some similarities with the boilerplate code. Now, obviously, the function xxx, we can remove this. And I don't expect the function to return hello, John, but cheers, John. And cheers, Jane. Let's see if that works.
Obviously, we'd have a little more work to do if we wanted to make this translatable with GS get message, etc. We're not going to go there today. Uh-oh. That was a bad test.
All right. The function doesn't do what we expected. But we expected that, didn't we?
Did we?
Yeah, well, I mean...
Oh, because yes, the function itself is still undressed.
Indeed. But that's the whole idea of test-driven development. What we just did is we created a test, and by creating the test, in a way, we defined what we expect from that function. This is not only an automated test, this is a requirement documentation. And you could imagine that even for, let's say, a non-technical audience, a business stakeholder, or I don't know, a Scrum Master or digitization consultant, going through a list of, hey, if I put in this, I get out that, might be a little bit easier. And that's not just an assumption. I already did this in the real world, and it really worked out well. Okay, now it's time to implement the function a little bit. So it's cheers plus the name and the exclamation mark, isn't it? Okay, I didn't expect the exclamation mark. Let's add it here too.
New requirement.
New requirement. And that's actually the magic of test-driven development. While you develop and you create the test, it's kind of, let's say you're building two hypotheses all the time to the same result, just from two different perspectives. And that helps you refine not only the requirement, but also the structure of your code. All right, let's see if that works. It worked. Hooray. Now, we've seen that we're already using that cheers function in our UI action. So if we go back to the incidents, select an incident here, and I want to be cheered up, nothing happens. Okay, what went wrong? Something went wrong, didn't it? Oh no, the same trap. The function is called cheer, not cheers.
That's the third time we've changed it.
Yeah, that's why, again, try to identify your typos early in the process.
Naming standards are important. Oh, there you go, Phil. Take a drink.
Indeed. Okay, now it says cheers administrator. I want to have my function, let's say, a little bit more flexible. What if, well, in that case, it's unlikely that the display name of a user is empty, but I want to make my function a little bit more bulletproof. So let's think about a few ways to break that function. Let's be a little bit creative. Let's be destructive.
So are you talking about a negative assertion on this, where you would test something and expect it to fail, and the failed test would actually be a valid test?
In a way, yes. So, for example, let's first think in terms of corner cases. What would I expect if I put in an empty string?
Cheers, nothing, exclamation point, or space, exclamation point.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, but that's not how it should look like, right? It would be better if it would look like this.
It'd be better. You're going to make your function do that?
Well, we just saw that this doesn't just look right. That looks better.
I agree, but that's not what your function will do now.
It's exactly not what the function will do. Now, we could also start, putting in bullshit into that function. No.
Yes, test other data types.
Or undefined. Let's see what it does.
You are really...
All of a sudden, it becomes very, very, let's say, less time consuming to check out what your function really does. And each time you look at the test, you might come up with new ideas on how to break it.
Usually the users do that for me.
Yeah, well.
They shouldn't. You should have a good test set beforehand.
Do they love you for being in that role?
and do I love them for finding bugs in my code?
Yeah. All right. So, okay. Now, if we put in undefined really as the syntactical JavaScript symbol undefined, it says cheers undefined. That's interesting. So it converts it into a string. The same it does for null, and it does the same thing for false. And well, of course, it produces the same effect with an empty string with that blank in here. But again, this is not what we want the function to do. I just made a decision that I expect the function to say just cheers. So if there's no name, if the parameter is not there or false or undefined, I want just see that the function returns cheers. So let's adapt the function to do that.
Feels like an if statement.
Easier than that.
Yeah, okay.
Well, but that wouldn't work in case of, now that would probably convert the whole thing into the string again.
Right.
So that wouldn't do. We could try to check for the type. How do we do this?
The way I would approach this is to say if not str name, then just return right after that, return cheers exclamation point.
Let's try this.
And then you don't need line 7.
Yeah.
Some might argue you could do the other half in an else. I say it's going to get there anyway, so why bother?
Exactly. Less lines of code. And I also don't like functions where the last line is not the return. But that might be a personal taste, but I like my functions to end with a return.
That looks like a good
Now
test.
it works. Congratulations. Now, we could, explore a number of other combinations here, like whether the string that we receive really looks like a name or something like that.
Sure.
For example, we could also accept a user object and then get the name from that user object.
I've found that to be a more effective way of doing functions in general is pass them objects rather than just a single parameter, because inevitably my functions end up with 5, 6, 7 parameters. I'm like, no, just send it an object or a glide record object or something. It gives you more depth into the data, because it just I catch myself going back to a lot of functions later saying, gee, I wish I had done this as an object earlier.
Now, the challenge here is, well, let's just see what happens.
Yeah. Wondering what you just did.
Well, I expect the test to fail. That's a given.
Right, because that, this failed miserably.
Illegal access to getter method, get class. What the hell?
Have you tested this yet, Sascha?
No.
You're just making it up as you go.
Do we have to change
So
cheer to cheers again?
GSGetUser is going to return you a user object, and this is not str_name doesn't say I am a string. And when it gets to that first if statement, it's saying, yes, this is a not null, not undefined object. That condition is not true. So it's going to try and say cheers plus object. I would have expected like object or something in there. That stack trace is very strange.
Indeed. But I mean, I think we've seen enough to get the point where test-driven development is leading us. So
Right.
it's getting easier and more natural to come up with new ideas on what a function might do, how it could be behaved, how the parameters would be working. And it's you're putting yourself into an iterative process that is probably faster than always going through the user interface, or I don't know, the data import, the flow, the whatever complex process it might be where your function is playing a role. But as soon as you start creating smaller function, ideally, which are immutables, so they're not depending on anything, any moving parts around them, the easier it gets to develop and to verify these smaller components. And finally, when you assemble them and you put them into a context, you can be more or less sure that they're working fine. And also, if let's say you've done all that and you've done everything right, now users enter the scene and they find ways of using your software that you couldn't even imagine. They bring data which is completely unexpected, and new combinations will come up and they will trigger defects or symptoms that need to be investigated. Now, if you started off like this, you'll have a number of tests, and you will find a way to find the right place where you can put that, let's say, this new data combination, that new string, that new parameter combination in one of your test cases, and then see how your lower level functions behave without having to go through the whole process where your code is being integrated. So this is, I would say, the main benefit after the initial development. It also helps in working on trouble tickets, on defects, and even in changing requirements. Let's say at some point in the future, we want that whole cheers thing. It's kind of worn out a little bit. We want to greet people with different words, or maybe we want to add something that changes the greeting depending on the time of the day, right? And all of a sudden, you run into that same process, but at least you have a place where you can start from and make your changes in a way that also protects you from creating issues just because you changed something on one end. You might want to break the whole functionality.
Well, you mentioned changing the message perhaps based on the time of day, which in my mind says, I need to write this function so it is testable, not just the function saying, what time of day is it, but pass me a parameter for the date, and then I will determine what message goes with that date. Exactly. So it's more testable than saying, well, I'm going to run this test in about 6 hours and see if the afternoon message comes up. No, that's not the way to do testing. So it's almost like the tail wagging the dog, as an expression goes, that you want to make sure your functions are testable. And to be clear, not every, if you're new to ATF, the Automated Test Framework, not every test is done in script like this. Most are pragmatic. Most are, you fill in a form. I go to this form. I fill in these fields. I expect this result. This would be for testing the deeper scripting, the script logic that's underneath a lot of these things. So I don't want to frighten anybody off who may be new to ATF.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there are also some let's say use cases where you can combine them. For example, if you have a number of user interactions that you want to test, you can create test steps that simulate the user behavior with a browser in front of the actual user interface and go through certain steps. And maybe at one point you reach a condition or something that requires a scripted test to be more precise, and maybe you want to do something that the out-of-the-box ATF test step simply can't do, and then create a test step that does exactly that. However, when we're talking about testing low-level functions, then I think this is probably the most straightforward way to do it. And to your point, absolutely, functions need to be designed in a way that they are testable. And ideally, every single function is, let's say, the more functions that are immutable, which means they are not dependent on anything that might change, let's say, the current time or a specific combination of data in the database or any kind of a user input, So whatever creates the dynamic in the function should always be passed as a parameter into the function.
That's easy. That's actually harder than it sounds. It sounds easy. It's not always that easy, because there's always a temptation to have one function call another, and then you may be causing dependencies that become very difficult to test.
Absolutely. However, if let's say you're doing all that, you're creating functions, and you try to make sure that they are immutable in most of the cases. You are consistent with your naming convention. You do everything right. If you apply test-driven development and always create the tests at the very point in time when you also create the functions and you implement them, it's becoming easier to follow these structural guidelines simply because you have to. It's simply more difficult to test functions that create dynamic output, depending on circumstances. Because if you want to test them, you would always have to simulate these circumstances in the real world, i.e., you would have to create records in the database that represent that current state which you want to test your function again, instead of a parameter that you just put into the function. And as always, there's pros and cons, and then you have to weigh in certain factors in each single situation. But at least that technique helps you to follow that path in more cases than you might do without doing it.
I know this is probably putting the statement on the wrong end of this presentation, but if you're not familiar with ATF, Automating Test Framework, we do have other videos on it that go into a great explanation, some nice demos of it. But it's really, as we like to call it, the gift that keeps on giving. The investment you make as you develop these applications is going to help, as Sascha mentioned, as you make changes, as new requirements come in to those applications, but also when it comes time to upgrade. If you run the test before the upgrade and say, worked great in Paris, then you upgrade to Rome. If something changes and your test doesn't run, you know it's likely related to the upgrade. If it runs again, hey, you just shortened your upgrade cycle by orders of magnitude versus a user logging in with a list of tests they need to do. Okay, I need to go to the Cheer application. I'm going to click this button. Do I see the right message? Write it down. I mean, come on. This is the system of record. This is the system of workflow. We shouldn't have to give somebody a spreadsheet with tests in this day and age.
And by saying that, you're absolutely right. The upgrade situation is, let's say, one of the central use cases that is always mentioned when we speak on ATF to customers. However, it's not the only one. And I think this is the main point I wanted to make here, is that it makes every developer faster to get to the results right from the start. It's not that preparation for that big upgrade mayhem that takes place once a year, where we have to invest hours and hours and days and weeks of preparation work creating all these ATFs, so that once the upgrade takes place, it saves us time and effort. No, it's helping you from the first minute of your work, from the first second, actually. So that's kind of the let's say, the spirit that comes with test-driven development, that it is not a huge investment, but it pays off immediately. It's not something long-term. It's not that big investment. It's right now.
Sascha, what do you think are the pushbacks to why most developers don't do ATF and test-driven development as part of the natural process? Is it just, oh, I don't have time, I've got to move on to the next story? Is it I guess I'm kind of answering my own question, but it feels like if there's not enough time, it means somebody underestimated how long that requirement would take. So if you went into the story and said, this is 4 points, well, it's 4 points. Don't forget to document. Don't forget to test and write those tests. You know, it feels like we're not putting enough investment into the front end of building out those stories before they get to the developer. Is that, do you see another side to that, or any other aspects?
Well, I had a number of conversations with clients who reached out to us and said, well, we're feeling all sorts of pain during upgrades, during releases. And our response was, well, I mean, how much use do you make from ATF up to now? And often the response was nothing, but yeah, well, we're interested. And then we have a conversation with them. And when we listen to them, many times they're saying that, yeah, but, creating tests is so time intensive. And, we don't have a good test coverage, and starting right now, how much time would it take to get there? And, you always have this, it's a huge investment counter argument, at least on the management level, the stakeholder level. And I think it helps a lot to explain that it's not a huge investment. It's a way of working. And if you support your teams, and if you motivate your teams to go down that route, and eventually allow for a little bit more time to learn and get, let's say, used to that new way of working in the beginning, it really pays off. And if I hear the individual developer that says, well, I'm kind of interested, and of course I know how unit testing works, but in that team, in that project, at that client, in this work environment, we're not given the time, it's not appreciated, so we don't do it, essentially. Yeah, well, if I had some time to get used to it and try it, maybe I would, but in most cases, it's really less of a skill issue, it's less of an experience issue, it's more a cultural issue. That's my impression.
Okay, so we need to clear those barriers and get, what's the word I'm looking for? Adoption, endorsement, support from the higher tiers to say, like, if we're going to be spending 6 weeks on our next upgrade, we should be spending 6 weeks on developing tests, so that next upgrade only takes 2 weeks, and then we've paid for it on the next upgrade. Is that a fair statement?
Well, from a bean counting perspective,
they want to know what the ROI is. If I'm going to invest time in building tests, especially retroactively, oh my, our incident change and problem processes don't have any tests around them. Someone's got to build them. When does that happen? So there's got to be a statement that says, if we invest now, the return on investment probably won't happen for Rome, but I'll guarantee you when you get to San Diego, you will crush that 6 to 8 week upgrade time down to 2. That'll open some eyes.
And that's absolutely perfect if you have a stakeholder who is willing to make an investment and defend it against management. Now, in these times, it's getting more and more difficult to get a budget approved that says, well, it's going to pay off, right? It's clear, and we can justify it, but it's not right now. It's not adding any features. It's not getting us faster to market. It's not getting us ahead of our competitor right now, but it's going to be something that pays off in 1 year's time. So it's going to be difficult for many stakeholders, for many decision makers, to make that call and convince management to go down that route. So I'm more inclined into the idea of protect your team, give them a little bit of time to get started. Give them the confidence that it is okay, that it is valued, that it is appreciated that they do this. And maybe for a few sprints, slow down a bit. I'm not talking about halting development for several weeks to cover up the gap in tests in the test coverage that you do not have, but just a few hours a week. That might be enough for many to get started. And once we're there, once the team adopts that way of working, it's getting faster and quicker. But it's difficult to prove that. I think
good stuff. Very good stuff. Thank you very much, Sascha, for bringing this to us. Not seeing any questions in the comments, but appreciate everybody who showed up today and watched this on demand later.
I do have a question.
You do have a question. Go ahead, Earl.
Now that for people like me that I got a glimpse at test-driven development and where I could be implementing that into how I do work, how do I learn more, or where would you recommend we go, Sascha, to get more resources on how to do test-driven development?
Well, of course, there's a number of courses available on Now Learning. We have a very, very nice set of YouTube videos on ATF. So if you just search for ServiceNow ATF on YouTube, you get a number of very, very well-made sessions around that, both for the beginner and the hardcore experts. So it starts with the fundamentals, how to structure it, how you get started, how you do really straightforward, simple things just by clicking and putting together a number of test steps, up to headless user interface testing using Docker images that sit in a separate environment and remote control ATF. So there's all sorts of knowledge available.
Excellent. Just thinking about any last minute announcements. We do have Now at Work and CreatorCon coming up next week, so be sure to check that out over on our ServiceNow.com site. And we will see you again, Live Coding Happy Hour next week, I believe is the next time. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Let's play that outro music and wave. Take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Right.